Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be looking at the weekly metagame breakdown for the standard best of 3 traditional standard format. We're going to cover the decks that can best get you into Mythic Rank for December. As always, we get the data from UntapGG, companion tool that runs alongside the Arena's client, aggregates user win rates, gives us a whole bunch of cool stats. So while we do the Arena focused version, we'll also do later in the week a tournament based. So if there's large tournaments, events, MTGO results, we look at those events as well to kind of compare and contrast between the two different like the ladder system versus tournament system. So make sure to follow both videos to keep up to date if you're very interested in the standard format. I mentioned it on the best of 1 video yesterday, but for the month of December, every penny that I make off YouTube revenue, I'm donating it all to local Toronto-based food banks. So if you want to help support the charity cause, you don't have to give any money. You just have to watch videos, and everything that will be earned will be donated. I'm trying to hit $800 as a goal. Bit of a stretch goal. It's more than I make in a month usually, but hoping additional views can kind of get us there and we can donate a nice lump sum to help those in need. I'll have a tracker going on future videos. It usually takes about 2 days leg. It's being December 2nd. For the financial amount to upload on the YouTube side. So I'll add that in, but that is kind of a thing that I do every year to help out local folks in need. So let's jump into the actual stats themselves. We're going to start with popularity of the day, and then I will show you all the deck lists. I'll timestamp them and paste them in the video description as well. Dimir Midrange is the most popular deck from Platinum to Mythic. By the way, we're looking Platinum to Mythic because the ladder just reset. There'll be a little bit of noise given that it's kind of overlapping a bit of the end of the month, so keep that in mind. But Dimir Midrange is the most popular deck at about 11%. Mono Red not that far behind at 10%. The domain, like the Zur Overlords decks, at 8.5%. Golgari Mid at 8%. Azorius Artifacts is a deck that's been picking up. We covered it in last week's tournament report, and now it's starting to see play on the ladder itself. Temur Prowess at 5%. The Beanstalk, like the Simic Terror deck, is at 4.7%, and then Rakdos Sacrifice at 4%. All in all, it's been pretty even. We see Golgari at one point being the highest. We saw Dimir being in the high 20s. This was around the Worlds time where people were picking it up, but relatively flat metagame, which is what you like to see. And looking at the stats themselves, we're going to cover 220,000 games of Magic that were played from November 12th through to today, Platinum to Mythic. So we're actually going to look at almost like a 2-week span. So it'll give us a nice little sample here to start the month, and then we'll kind of cover there. There's a few decks that have popped up that haven't been in the last few weeks, so it'll give us a nice little sample here. Next week as well, we'll focus just on the first week of the month. We'll also cover if there's any folks that have kind of pushed into Mythic, which we'll cover in one of the decks very early in the first day or two of the month. Mono Red Aggro is the highest win rate deck at 75%. So this is a pretty stock list. Notably, the Burst Lightnings have replaced Shock, but this is from Worlds. This is the list that a lot of people are running. This is the list that made Screaming Nemesis a $50 card here in Canada, and I'm still salty I didn't buy him at $11. But pretty stock list, all things considered. Nothing really changed here. Where we're seeing kind of the addition is in the sideboard. A lot of these lists have been moving to Sunspine links as a 3 of, just to deal with Golgari or Dimir or any of the greedier mana bases, things with life gain. While you do have the ability to shock your own Nemesis to kind of redirect the damage, it could be a little hard against white-based exile and stuff like that. This could kind of punish those decks, and it doesn't get hit by temporary lockdown. The Urbas Forge, this is usually a 3 to 4 of when you have the Sunspine links, because notably you are kind of upping your curve from the existing curve of the deck. Fealty for the big mana demon stuff, Torch for the smaller stuff, and Lithomantic Barrage good against Oculus or any the Dimir threats, mono white threats, Beza, stuff like that. Next deck is Golgari Mid, 71%. So there's varied versions of this. There's some that are more creature dense. You'll have with Caustic Bronco, more than one Scavenging Ooze, for example, in the main. Some folks are trying out that new Spider from Foundations, a 3-drop that replaces creatures when it dies. You see kind of the split Dreams of Steel and Oil and Duress, just flexible hand hate. Llanowar Elf gets you ahead. This version here, your Unholy Annex is a 3-drop oftentimes, and you have Archfiend Dross with the Sheoldred split in here. You'll sometimes see maybe a one-off Vivian, Some of them are playing a little bit bigger into Liliana Dreadhorde, but for the most part, the Archfiend 3 to 4 of with the Unholy Annex is kind of your curb topper. You'll sometimes see Tranquil Frillback in the main. You might see Preacher in the main. The Frillback's a little bit more common though, since it's a pretty flexible card. The other thing you'll see is with these decks, they usually will have Soulstone Sanctuary as a way to have another creature that enables Unholy Annex. Various kind of cheap removals, Hand Hate, Ghost Vacuum for Graveyard Hate, Scavenging Ooze for Graveyard Hate and Life Gain, Terra Sunder flexible removals, Sweepers with Choke and Miasma, as well as Harvester of Misery and Gix Command, Liliana for the Dimir Midrange matchups, Render Inert for Archfiend to draw smears, you take the counters off it, and then Tranquil Frillback, like we mentioned, flexible card, Artifact Enchantment Hate, Graveyard Hate, Life Gain, and then Vivian for the grindier matchups. Also could, like, the -3 is useful to just take down like an Artifact Enchantment or creature with flying. So Izzet Hellraiser, 70%. So this list, someone got number 5 Mythic with, and they were this person here, Nithin. They went 30 and 5 with it, so contributing a large portion to this. So this deck here is looking to draw, discard cards into your graveyard. And basically with Capacious Hellraiser, it costs 3 less if you have 9 or more cards in your graveyard. And then when it enters, you exile 3 cards at random from your graveyard. You choose a non-creature, non-land from among them, put and then you get a copy of it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So what you try to do is with Season of Weaving, you make copies of the Hellraiser, and then you get to keep going and build a big army. If you have Bitter Reunion out, it can give haste for that turn. Chandra can double up your spells. You have the other Chandra, Flame Shaper, can be a way to get card advantage, create a token copy of the Hellraiser, and just a way to kind of distribute damage. You have the Roaring Furnace, Steaming Sauna, and then just things like Ill Times, both a sweeper and an enabler for the deck. Put cards in your graveyard, bunch of cheap removal options, unsummon in here over because you could bounce your own Capricious Hellraiser as well. Your graveyard, or you have Graveyard Hate, Lithomantic Barrage, as we mentioned, Soul Guide Lantern. So this is good at taking out one-ofs. Soul Guide just nukes the whole graveyard. You have a Braid for artifact removal and just cheap creature removal, good against like Forge, cheap counters and negates, Sweeper and Pyroclasm, as well as Brotherhood's End, Scorching Dragonfire, exile-based removal for like, it's skipping my mind, the black 2/3 Unstoppable Slasher. Tishana's Tidebinder for activated abilities, Jace for the mid-rangey mirrors, you can mill them out, and Virtue and Knowledge can copy target activated triggers abilities, so it's another way to kind of double up on abilities and have a Panharmonicon effect on the side. Azorius Artifacts. So this is the deck we mentioned last week. It is a Leyline Axe deck. So ideally, Leyline Axe is in your opener, and then it's like a blue-white kind of artifact aggro shell. So this takes advantage of Regal Bunnicorn. You can give it double strike and trample, which is really good. You have Zoetic Glyph that can animate stuff. There's a bunch of cheap artifacts. Steel Seraph is a way to kind of give flying, lifelink, whatever it may be. Sheltered by Ghost as removal plays really nicely. Then you have Mockingbird, which can also copy things like Regal Bunnicorn, Warden, stuff of that nature. But you're basically just low to the ground aggro, bunch, kind of almost like a pseudo Convoke shell. And then like Case of the Flitch Falcon can animate as your artifacts along with the Zoetic. Also Smite, cheap removal, Graveyard Hate, Ghost Vacuum, Destroy Evil for big creatures or enchantments, things like Temporary Lockdown, cheap counters, Lauren, Artifact Enchantment Hate, and then Tishana's Tidebinder. We then go to Azorius Oculus, so it's had a bit of a rebound, 68%. So this one here, we're seeing 2 copies of Kiora. That kind of plays into the game plan of drawing, discarding. Ideally get any of these creatures into your graveyard, recommission or helping hand it back. Again, you're seeing unsummon in these lists because you can bounce your own creatures as opposed to just your opponent's effects. Chart, of course, Founding of the Third Path, always kind of put cards into your graveyard. We're seeing Get Lost being played over the exile-based version. And then a Pitlock Prankster, Moment of Truth, just always to kind of draw, discard, loot through your deck. Exercise, Artifact Enchantment, or Big Thing Hate, negate for bigger decks, sweepers, stuff of that nature. Mentor comes in if your opponent is playing a lot of graveyard hate. Lockdown for the go wide aggressive decks. Sheltered by Ghost for the bigger decks as a way to have pseudo protection and life. You have the Beanstalk deck, Simic Terror, 65%. So this deck here is looking to put a bunch of cheap instants and sorceries into your graveyard to cheat out Eddie Mark Crab or Tolarian Terror for 1 to 2 mana respectfully. These cards, while it's costing only 1 to 2 to cast, are still the original casting cost, so they trigger up the Beanstalk to give you some card advantage. This town ain't big enough, gets cost reduced as well with the same effect with up the Beanstalk to target one of your own things. So you can bounce back one of these effects to, like, say, get back Eddie Mark Crab's ability to tap down again, or reset your Storm Chaser's talent. Into the Flood Maw, we're seeing in this list. You could also play and summon to bounce your own things in the same effect. Bushwhack, Analyze the Pollen are cheap enablers, so you can help them to find lands early or late game to find your gas. But that's pretty much the deck there. Pick your poison, artifact, enchantment, hate. You could also play Paw Patch Formation as direct hit. Soul Guide Lantern for graveyard decks. 3 steps ahead if you need to be kind of a shift up, have some counters in there. You can also copy your creatures, which is good. Long River's Pull, just for the creature decks instead. Negate big mana decks. Anything that's trying to play like Sweepers, Exile, like your mono white midrange, stuff of that nature. Filigree Salix for go wide decks, or like even against mono red, it's not terrible. Just put it at 1 or 2. Sweep them up that way. Obstinate Bailoff for discard decks, or just as a way to gain some life. Mono Red Goblins is a deck we don't see too often, 65%. So we got a couple new goblins in the recent set. Seer Slicer Goblin, 2 mana, 2/1. As long as a creature attacked during the turn, at your end step, you get a 1/1 Goblin token, which is pretty sweet. This card, I had it in my pre-release, and it went hard. 1 drop into just keeping this like as a static ability even was pretty sweet. Then we have Dropkick Bomber, 3 mana, 2/3, Lord for your goblins. Your other goblins get plus power. And then for a red mana, another target goblin you control gains flying, and when this creature deals combat damage, sacrifice it. So some evasion for your goblins, which is nice. Breaches also happens to be a goblin that can provide some card advantage. You have Squeeze in here. You have the Lord of Ruveneld Hordemaster that also provides card advantage when things die. A bunch of cheap goblins here. Then you also have the Painter Studio Defaced Gallery. Mainly for the Defaced Gallery side, when you attack, attacking creatures get +1/0, so it's another Lord effect. And then the Painter Studio does provide some card advantage later in the game. Seeing Soulstone Sanctuary in here as a way to have pseudo goblin lands. First Lightning, cheap removal. Ghost Vacuum for graveyard hate with Soul Lantern. Screaming Nemesis for red-based damage-based mirrors. Twisted Fealty for big decks. Furbrass Forge for the grindier matchups. And Witchstalker Frenzy as a bigger removal spell. We have the Temur Prowess Otters deck. So we've gone through this a couple times, but we'll just do a quick run through. Core of the deck, Valley Floodcaller taps and untaps your Otters and Rats whenever you cast a non-creature spell. Enduring Vitality lets your creatures tap for mana. So basically this combination lets you tap and tap, generate mana. So you then have things like these cheap effects that draw you a card. You have a bunch of Otters out, and then you start generating mana. Once you can get like 4 mana, I believe, you can start using this town ain't big enough with conjunction of Storm Chaser's talent and something like Up the Beanstalk. You draw cards through your deck. And then you're basically able to just keep netting mana, upping the Storm Chaser's talent to level 2 to get back this town ain't big enough, and just keep kind of chaining through. We're seeing things like Paw Patch Formation in the main, Flood Pit Drowner, Bitter Reunion as a way to draw discard. But that's kind of the deck. You make them really big, and then you attack in with big creatures, or you could Song of Tokuzan to have a big kind of board of creatures. Graveyard Hay, Flood Pit Drowner could tap down creatures and shuffle. Herbology Instructor gains you life, and you can keep bouncing it back to hand in the loops to just keep getting life back. Paw Patch, Artifact Enchantment, or Flying Hate. You have some removal options with Pyroclasm and Scorching. Dragonfire, Up the Beanstalk for the grindier matchups. Nemesis for the red-based mirrors or life gain decks. And then Dissection Tools for the aggressive deck. Zur Domain, Zur Overlords. So this deck here, you're playing the Overlord cycle. Cast them in pending cost. You get a value kind of play, right? You get the effects right away, and then they go on layaway. With Up to Beanstalk, you draw cards. But with this deck here, you can Zur, and with the Zur, it lets you animate your creatures that are still enchantments, so you still get the attack trigger even though they're on the impending cost, which is kind of some nice value. Sometimes you'll see Scroll Shift in these lists. This one's got a Elish Norn. They're playing Split Up over Temporary Lockdown, and then kind of a 2-2 split with your sweepers. This deck's very easy to enable to main with the effects of like Overlord of the Hauntwood, so you get Leyline Binding discount. This version's on one Atraxa. You usually don't see the Atraxas, but one Atraxa, one Nissa, Ascendant Animus, so just kind of flexing out your top end spots depending on the meta. Authority of the Consuls for the aggressive decks, Elspeth Smite for aggressive decks, Doppelgang for the mid-range mirrors, Negate for kind of these Domainy-esque mirrors, mid-range mirrors, Paw Patch we've mentioned, Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate, Beza for the aggressive decks. Then go to Dimir Midrange, 64%. So this is a tempo-oriented deck. Bunch of cheap flyers, things like Spyglass Siren, Fairy Mastermind, Deep Cavern Bat. Pairing it with both Kaido, Cunning Infiltrator. This gains loyalty whenever a creature deals damage to a player. Can make a creature unblockable, draw discard, and then makes a ninja. And then whenever you get an emblem, whenever you cast a spell, you create a blue ninja. You also have Kaido, Bane of Nightmares, that could be ninjutsu'd in, and then gives your other ninjas a bonus. Enduring Curiosity draws you a bunch of cards, Shelly, and an Unstoppable Slasher in here. Cheap removal, Hand Hate, Graveyard Hate, cheap removal, kind of big mana decks, blot out for the bigger like demon decks, planeswalkers, stuff like that. Tishana's Tiebinder for activated abilities, and then Shieldred for life gain in kind of the grindy out mid-range decks. Usually you kind of trade a bunch of resources, slap down Shelly, and she can take over the game. We then go to Rakdos Sacrifice, 63. This one's a fun deck to play. So you're using things like the Percussionist for card advantage, Fear of Lost Teeth could be removal. You make a token with the Cursed Roll that can then be sacrificed, and then you're sacrificing those effects to like Disturbing Mirth, which draws you cards, and then can be Manifest Dread. The fear of missing out, I play this deck quite a few games. I usually just end up cutting this. Like, you have the Delirium package, but I don't know, it never made the cut for me. You end up winning most games with stuff like Braids or just Forge going off with like the sacrifice themes. Lots of ways to kind of eat away your opponent's hand, get some accrued card advantage with it. You might want Fountain Port, just a one of in the mana base could be reasonable. Hand Hate, Graveyard Hate, cheap removal, Hand Hate, Sweepers for the go wide aggressive decks, Lily for the grindier matchups, the other Forge for the grindier matchup, and Withering Torment as a way to deal with enchantments out of a black-based deck. And then lastly, mono white control, 59%. So this deck here, you'll see a small splash for blue for the Jace in the sideboard. You could also make like treasure tokens and stuff to cast that, but Caretaker's Talent deck with Enduring Innocence, make a bunch of tokens, draw you a bunch of cards, then just a ton of removal, Lay Down Arms, Get Lost, Soul Partition, Sunfalls. So you're just grinding them out, making tokens, eventually winning just through like Fountain Ports or whatever kind of threat sticks that you make copies of. And then Virtue could just make them really big over time. You have Season of Burrow as a flexible removal option as well. Authority for the aggressive decks, along with Elspeth Smite, Exercise for kind of the mirrors, big decks. Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate, split up as another cheap sweeper, and then Jace for the mid-range domain matchups. You just mill out your opponent. That's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, what you've been enjoying, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.